Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Well, if you were with me 2 days ago, you know that there were a lot of technical difficulties. I was trying out something new, and I don't know, I wasn't very pleased with it, especially after reviewing it a couple times. Just wasn't very happy with the result. The technical difficulties, the wind, the reading, just didn't quite do it for me. So I thought I'd try it again. So we're going to go back and reread this one section of Romeo and Juliet. Now, in between that day, which had beautiful sunshine, it was really lovely outside, and today, we've had April 1st, April Fool's Day. And now here it is, and it's gray again. Not cold, though. It's about 55 degrees, which is pretty nice for Minnesota. And we're into April, and we're still trucking along. We're still hanging on, which is great. Here's to it. So I've got the lubrication here tonight, the liquid sustenance, and I'm ready to go. Now, I'll talk a little bit about April 1st. You know, yesterday was April Fool's Day, and hopefully you went out and played pranks on people and tied fish onto the back of your best friends. If you didn't, you're missing out on half the fun of what it means to be a human being. April Fool's Day is great for all kinds of pranks. I think my favorite prank that I saw was this article about an organized march on Washington to end COVID virus. And I was able to prank a few people with that, saying I was going to go and join the hordes that were coming together in Washington, D.C. to defeat the virus. And I was going to share space in a hotel with two other couples. So that was kind of fun. If you are wondering why we do any of that silly nonsense, aside from the fact that we're human beings, and human beings do a lot of silly things, well, April Fool's Day goes way back. This is an ancient holiday. And some people attribute it, at least in its modern form, to a switch in our calendar at one point in history. Right around the time of our man Shakespeare, actually. 1582, the Council of Trent adopted a new calendar, a new year calendar. Because over time, the calendar, because you can't fit an exact number of days into the lunar solar cycle. So the calendar over time gets backlogged, so to speak. And so the Council of Trent switched from the Julian calendar to the Gregorian calendar. And that switch put the new year at January 1st, rather than at the older place, which was April 1st. Now think about that for a minute. That's 1582 that calendar switched. So poems and plays and artwork that referenced events were referencing them with respect to the idea that the new year began in April. Like Gowan and the Green Knight, for instance, the poem Gowan and the Green Knight, like my hat to celebrate that poem, Gowan and the Green Knight celebrates Christmas. And the Christmas season basically is a time when people get together in order to enjoy the Christmas spirit, but not the New Year at the time that the poem was written. The poem was written at a time period when the New Year was different than it is now. So they would have not seen the New Year coming until April 1st. The other thing that we have to keep in mind is that April 1st was the spring equinox, the vernal equinox, which is an ancient festival. And so the New Year was on April 1st, the vernal equinox. Excuse me for a minute. So that vernal equinox was the unpredictable weather and the newness of life. And there was a festival in Roman mythology, which is called the Feast of Hilaria. And it was dedicated to the cult of Cybele. And it was inspired originally by even Egyptian mythology, Isis and Osiris and Seth. In that mythology of Egypt, Isis Well, Osiris basically gets torn to pieces by his brother Seth, and the pieces are scattered all over the river Nile. And the goddess has to go, Isis has to go and pick up the pieces and put them back together, and they get reconstituted, and Osiris is reborn as the sun god Ra. So it was a story of sort of breaking apart the pieces of the god, and then the god gets resurrected. So that celebration was when everything was topsy-turvy, everything was made new, everything was renewed. That was where that celebration really started. So our April Fool's Day goes way back, Egyptians, way, way, way back. And now we celebrate it by playing pranks on other people, and by, oddly enough, there's a tradition that my daughter introduced me to, which is the taping of a fish to the back of somebody. I never heard this before, but that's a French tradition where you would tape a fish to somebody else, called a poisson d'avril, which is an April fish. The idea being that in April you can catch fish really easily, I guess, because they're dumb in April. They're just coming awake again, I suppose. And so somebody who was gullible, somebody who was easily caught, is a poisson d'avril in French. And so you tape a fish to the back of somebody. April Fool, they called people April Fools because they were still adhering to the earlier Julian calendar, which matched the vernal equinox. And they were not abiding by the new Gregorian calendar, sort of an early product slam of the older product or something. In Scotland, especially, there's some funny traditions. There's something called the hunting of the gowk, which I like that. The hunting of the gowk. A gowk is a fool or a cuckoo bird. And then it's a 2-day celebration, I guess, in Scotland, the hunting of the gowk. And then after that, there's the Taile Day, or tail day, where you stick something onto the tail of somebody else, the posterior, the buttocks. And that's probably where we get the idea, the pin the tail on the donkey idea. And I wonder, too, if there's a poem by Lewis Carroll called The Hunting of the Snark. And I wonder if he took that from that Scottish hunting of the gowk. Because, of course, it's all well and good until the gowk is a boogem, right? And turns on you suddenly when you least expect it. So, anyway, to business. That's where our April Fool's Day traditions come from, and as part of my April Fool tradition, I'm redoing this video, because the other one had quite a few technical difficulties, not the least of which was the wind blowing over the camera. So if you want a good laugh, you want a good hoot, go check out the older video. I'm going to leave it up just so people can laugh at it, laugh at me. That's what I do. And I'm going to redo this reading so that we can hear it together. So hopefully you have your copy. Thanks, Liz. Absolutely. So hopefully you have your copy and you can read along. So we're reading today in this is Act 3. This is Scene 1, the opening of the Act 3. Now, as I said previously, Act 1 and 2 gave us this sort of dream-like vision of romance. But this, again, it's not a romance, right? So we get the dream-like romance that develops between Romeo and Juliet, allegedly. And I've been making the case that this is actually more about lust, about unbridled lust, and referencing Sonnet 129. In Sonnet 129, he talks about how unbridled lust or unchecked lust is something which can't be trusted. It is something which is murderous and bloody. It is something which is rash or impetuous. That it's something which seems to be a dream before, and afterwards is sort of a nightmare. It's just fleeting, goes away. Promises something great, but then doesn't actually deliver. And if we're looking at Romeo, especially as a character who is characterized by or punctuated by lust, well, here he is dreaming of something great, something that will fulfill this emptiness inside him, which originally he thinks is Rosaline. But he goes from Rosaline to the new character of Juliet and hopes Juliet will fulfill this emptiness or this longing or this sorrow inside of him. And Juliet, I've been portraying her so far, Juliet sees in Romeo something like a bird that can be captured and tied to a string. Sees in him something like a character that can be easily manipulated using her feminine wiles. And she seems to be somebody who is wanting to do damage to her mom and dad rather than somebody who's deeply, madly, head over heels in love with Romeo. Certainly, if we take her marriage to Romeo, that was the coolest marriage, not cool as in, hey, you're cool, but cool as in cold marriage scene I think that it has ever been on stage. Romeo, who's all, yay, Juliet, good to see you. Juliet's like, hello, Romeo, let's get married. It's a very odd contrast. And Romeo, right after getting hitched to Juliet, they don't consummate the marriage immediately. There's no sexual congress between them. Instead, what happens is that Romeo goes back to his droogs and meets up with Mercutio and with Tybalt. And we have this scene that we're going to read today, which is one of real violence, almost animalian violence. And one which really begins, I think, to show very vividly that this is not a romance. What we're dealing with here is not this nice, sweet romance that's just misunderstood, where the parents are the villains keeping the two young lovers apart. Rather, it seems like we're dealing with something which is a calamity. It's a disaster. These two should never be got together. They're like the keymaster and the gatekeeper. It's a very bad idea to bring them together. But when they do come together, lots of people end up dying. And that's not good. So I'm making the contention here that we're reading a play that's more of a disaster. It's more of a tragedy, as it's called in the original title. It's more of a tragedy. It's the tragedy of almost inevitable calamity that occurs when you have these two powers, that be the feminine masculine power, or the power of the nominalist realist, if you will, or the power of night and day, and they meet with one another, and it's explosive. Okay. The character who has thought that this would be a good idea to bring together these powers has been Friar Lawrence. And bear in mind that Lawrence has thought of this as a way of solving the issue. So, is he at fault? We'll let the jury decide, but Lawrence certainly seems to think that if he brings these two together, he can solve the problem of violence. And that's suspect. Maybe the problem of violence is bigger than Friar Lawrence can take on, the alchemist Friar Lawrence can take on. Perhaps it may be that the problem of violence is much deeper in the human spirit, and hence the problem of nominalism realism is much deeper in the human spirit. The problem that's tearing Europe apart on the macrocosmic level, that's tearing Verona apart on the microcosmic level, is something which is inherent in human existence and can't be fixed. Maybe. If that's what the play is saying, in my opinion, I think it's a much more profound play, a much more powerful play, than if it's simply two young people who are kept apart by cruel parents. But let's go ahead and read Act 3, Scene 1, and see what happens in Act 3, Scene 1. Act 3, Scene 1, a public place. Enter Mercutio, Benvolio, page, and servants. Benvolio begins. I pray thee, good Mercutio, let's retire. The day is hot, the Capulets are broad, and if we meet, we shall not escape a brawl, for now these hot days is the mad blood stirring. Thou art like one of these fellows, says Mercutio, that when he enters the confines of a tavern, claps me his sword upon the table, and says, God send me no need of this. And by the operation of the second cup draws it on the drawer, when indeed there is no need. Am I like such a fellow? Says Benvolio. Come, come, thou art as hot a Jack in thy mood as any in Italy, and as soon moved to be moody, and as soon moody to be moved. At what too? Says Benvolio. Nay, an there were two such, we should have none shortly, for one should kill the other. Thou wilt quarrel with a man that hath a hair more or hair less in his beard than thou hast. Thou wilt quarrel for a man for cracking nuts, having no other reason but because thou hast hazel eyes. What eye but such an eye would spy out such a quarrel? Thy head is full of quarrels, as an egg is full of meat, and yet thy head hath been beaten as addle as an egg for quarreling. Thou hast quarrelled with a man for coughing in the street, because he hath wakened thy dog that hath lain asleep in the sun. Didst thou not fall out with a tailor for wearing his new doublet before Easter? With another for tying his new shoes with old riband? And yet thou wilt tutor me from quarrelling? And I were so apt, says Benvolio, to quarrel as thou art, any man should buy the fee simple of my life for an hour and a quarter. The fee simple. Ah, simple. Enter Tybalt and others. By my head, here come the Capulets. Ah, by my heel, I care not. Tybalt says, follow me close, for I will speak to them. Gentlemen, Caden, a word with one of you. Ah, but one word with one of us. Couplet with something. Make it a word and a blow. You shall find me apt enough to that, sir, and you will give me occasion. Ha! Could you not take some occasion without giving? Mercutio, thou consortest with Romeo. Consort? What does that make us, minstrels? And thou make minstrels of us. Look to hear nothing but discords. Here's my fiddlestick. Here's that shall make you dance. Zounds! Consort! We talk here in the public haunt of men, says Benvolio. Either withdraw unto some private place, or reason coldly of your grievances, or else depart. Here all eyes gaze on us. Ah, men's eyes were made to look. Let them gaze. I will not budge, for no man's pleasure I. Enter Romeo. Well, peace be with you. Here comes my man. But I'll be hanged, sir, if he wear your livery. Marry, go before to field, he'll be your follower. Your worship, in that sense, may call him man. Romeo, the love I bear thee can afford no better term than this. Thou art a villain. Romeo responds, Tybalt, the reason that I have to love thee doth much excuse the appertaining rage to such a greeting. Villain am I none. Therefore farewell. I see thou knowest me not. Boy, this shall not excuse the injuries that thou hast done me. Therefore turn and draw. I do protest I never injured thee, but loved thee better than thou canst devise, till thou shalt know the reason of my love. And so, good Capulet, which name I tender as dearly as mine own, be satisfied. Mercutio responds, Oh, calm, dishonorable, vile submission. Alla Stoccata carries it away. Tybalt, you rat-catcher, will you walk? What wouldst thou have with me? Good king of cats, nothing but one of your 9 lives. That I mean to make bold withal, and as you shall use me hereafter, dry beat the rest of the 8. Will you pluck your sword out of his pilcher by the ears? Make haste, lest mine be about your ears ere it be out. I'm for you. And they fight. Gentle Mercutio, put thy rapier up. Come, sir, your posado. Draw, Benvolio, beat down their weapons. Gentlemen, for shame, forbear this outrage. Tybalt, Mercutio, the prince expressly hath forbid this bandying in Verona's streets. Hold, Tybalt, good Mercutio. Tybalt, under Romeo's arm, stabs Mercutio, and then flies with his followers. I'm hurt. A plague of both your houses. I am sped. Is he gone, and hath nothing? What art thou hurt? Says Benvolio. Aye, a scratch, marry, 'tis enough. Where is my page? Go, villain, fetch a surgeon. Exit the page. Courage, man, says Romeo. The hurt cannot be much. No, 'tis not so deep as a well, nor so wide as a church door, but 'tis enough. 'Twill serve. Ask for me tomorrow, and you shall find me a grave. Man, I am peppered, I warrant, for this world. The plague of both your houses. Soon's a dog, a rat, a mouse, a cat to scratch a man to death, a braggart, a rogue, a villain that fights by the book of arithmetic. Why the devil came you between us? I was hurt under your arm. I thought all for the best, says Romeo. Help me into some house, Benvolio, or I shall faint. A plague of both your houses. They have made worms meat of me. I have it, and soundly too. Your houses. Exeunt Mercutio and Benvolio. Romeo says, This gentleman, the prince's near ally, my very friend, hath got this mortal hurt in my behalf. My reputation stained with Tybalt's slander. Tybalt that an hour hath been my kinsman. Oh, sweet Juliet, thy beauty hath made me effeminate, and in my temper softened valor's steel. Re-enter Benvolio. Oh, Romeo, brave Mercutio's dead. That gallant spirit hath aspired to the clouds, which too untimely here did scorn the earth. This black fate on more days doth depend. This but begins the woe others must end. Re-enter Tybalt. Here comes the furious Tybalt back again. Alive, in triumph, and Mercutio slain. Away to heaven, respective lenity and fire-eyed fury be my conduct now. Now, Tybalt, take the villain back again, that late thou gavest me, for Mercutio's soul is but a little way above our heads, staying for thine to keep him company. Either thou or I, or both, must go with him. Thou wretched boy, that didst consort him here, shout with him hence. This shall determine that. And they fight, and Tybalt falls. Benvolio says, Romeo, away, be gone. The citizens are up and Tybalt slain. Stand not amazed, the prince will doom thee death. If thou art taken, hence be gone, away. Oh, I am fortune's fool. Why dost thou stay? Says Benvolio. Exit Romeo. Enter citizens and all. The first citizen. Which way ran he that killed Mercutio? Tybalt that murderer, which way ran he? Benvolio. There lies that Tybalt. Up, sir, go with me, I charge thee, in the prince's name obey. Enter the prince, attended. Montague, Capulet, their wives, and others. Where are the vile beginners of this fray? Oh, noble prince,
I can discover all the unlucky manage of this fatal brawl. There lies the man, slain by young Romeo, that slew thy kinsman, brave Mercutio.
Lady Capulet.
Tybalt, my cousin, oh, my brother's child, oh, prince, oh, cousin, husband, oh, the blood is spilled of my dear kinsman. Prince, as thou art true, for blood of ours, shed blood of Montague. Oh, cousin, cousin.
Benvolio. Who began this bloody fray? Says the prince.
Tybalt, here slain, whom Romeo's hand did slay. Romeo, that spoke him fair, bid him to think how nice the quarrel was, and urged withal your high displeasure. All this uttered with gentle breath. Calm look, knees humbly bowed, could not take truce with the unruly spleen of Tybalt, deaf to peace. But that he tilts with piercing steel at bold Mercutio's heart, who, all his heart, turns deadly point to point, and with a martial scorn, with one hand beats cold death aside, and with the other sends it back to Tybalt, whose dexterity retorts it. Romeo, he cries aloud, hold, friends! Friends, part! And swifter than his tongue, his agile arm beats down their fatal points, and twixt them rushes, underneath whose arm an envious thrust from Tybalt hit the life of stout Mercutio, and then Tybalt fled. And by he comes back to Romeo, who had but newly entertained revenge, and to it they go like lightning. For ere I could draw to part them was stout Tybalt slain, and as he fell did Romeo turn to fly. This is the truth, or let Benvolio die.
Lady Capulet.
He is a kinsman to the Montague. Affection makes him false. He speaks not true. Some 20 of them fought in this black strife, and all those 20 but kill one life. I beg for justice, which thou, prince, must give. Romeo slew Tybalt. Romeo must not live.
Romeo slew him. He slew Mercutio, who now the price of his dear blood doth owe. Montague says, not Romeo, prince. He is Mercutio's friend. His fault concludes, but the law should end the life of Tybalt.
And for that offense,
says the prince, immediately we do exile him hence. I have an interest in your hate's proceeding. My blood for your rude brawls doth lie a-bleeding. But I'll merce you with so strong a fine that you shall all repent the loss of mine. I will be deaf to pleading and excuses. Nor tears nor prayers shall purchase out abuses. Therefore use none. Let Romeo hence in haste. Else when he's found, that hour is his last. Bear hence this body and attend our will. Mercy but murders, pardoning those that kill. Exeunt. Now, let's take a look at a few things here. The first is I'm startled by Lady Capulet's response. Why does she get the word upon Tybalt? And why is she so unhinged by his death? It suggests that there's much more affection in Lady Capulet for Tybalt than maybe previously we thought. Now, that may be reading too much into it. But again, if we're looking for motive here or background for the characters, one of the backgrounds may be that Lady Capulet, same age roughly as Tybalt, might have had a very deep affection, perhaps, maybe even some congress with him. One way or the other, she goes to exaggerate the story of his fight here at the end, saying 20 men fought against my blood, my kinsman. And he slew all 20, but they killed him in the end. That's how she recasts the story, even though she isn't there to see it. Benvolio, who was there to see it, makes nice of the story by retelling it all. And I think gains kudos with the prince, too, in doing so. But Lady Capulet's outs is remarkable to see. You know, Tybalt, my cousin, O my brother's child, O prince, O cousin, husband, oh, the blood is spilled of my dear kinsman, prince, right? Oh, cousin, cousin. She just goes on and on. So it does give a suggestion that Lady Capulet, at least, deeper affection, it seems, for Tybalt than perhaps we see at the beginning. Again, if we're looking for motive for Juliet, let's just imagine for a minute. If Juliet sees her older father, who's married to Lady Capulet, and let's say that she sees her mother, who's only in her 20s, roughly, perhaps being a little too affectionate to one of her cousins, who is in his 20s, and she grows up with her mother partying and being out of the picture all the time, and she herself is nursed by someone else, there seems to be a great deal of motive for dislike, at least, perhaps hatred or a desire to knife back at mommy here for Juliet. So it does give some question as to whether Juliet is this nice, beautiful young person that some people read her to be. But that being said, I really appreciate this scene where Romeo tries to stop from fighting with Tybalt. Tybalt is there in order to fight him. Remember, he sent a letter to Lord Montague about Rosalind and Romeo. Nobody knows about Juliet and Romeo yet, except for Friar Lawrence. And Tybalt has sent a letter that condemns Romeo's treatment of Rosalind. And one wonders about that. Does that mean that Romeo has come on too strong to Rosalind, or that Romeo has been trying to seduce Rosalind without any intent to marry her? Who knows, one way or the other. Or it could be that Tybalt is just a hothead, and that he's trying to get back at the family of his enemy. Who knows? One way or the other, it's as though Tybalt wants to get Romeo, not Mercutio. Remember that Mercutio is not a Montague. Mercutio is blood kin to the prince, but he's friends with Romeo. Okay, and in this trying not to fight Tybalt, Romeo actually doesn't respond with the appropriate response. He doesn't exercise what the ancients called thumos, or thumotic response. The response is somebody coming at you, at least Shakespeare suggests, should be to defend proximate goods, friends, self, family, the material goods. Tybalt is on fire for killing Romeo, or at least wounding him or hurting him. And Romeo doesn't try to defend himself at all. And Mercutio gets terribly angry about that. And he actually says that Romeo's actions are dishonorable and vile, that he's submitting to this guy, Tybalt, rather than challenging him. He sees it as unmanly, as not worthy of Romeo. And even Romeo, after Mercutio's death, says that he has been made effeminate by Juliet. Juliet has softened valor's steel in him. His reputation has been stained, and Tybalt has slandered him, and now Mercutio is dead, right? And it's Romeo's fault that Mercutio is dead. So he's been made effeminate. He's been emasculated. His ability to respond as a man has been taken away. Now let's get rid of any modern thoughts about what makes a man or a woman, or gender fluidity or any of that sort of thing. Shakespeare wasn't thinking about gender fluidity. What Shakespeare was thinking about was how a man responds and how a woman responds. And he had distinct views of what that should be like. And one of the things he's pointing out is there is something inherent, according to Shakespeare, something inherent in men to respond in a manly way to threats, to things that threaten your spouse, your children, your family, your goods, your own person. The response, Shakespeare seems to suggest, is a thumotic response. And if you respond with, make love not war, peace brother, right? I don't want to fight you at all. You're going to get your tail kicked. And you're going to have something happen which is unmanly. It's like Dog Day Afternoon, the movie, if you've ever seen that, with Dustin Hoffman. To not respond in a thumotic way means that the violent barbarians actually have the better of you. And that's what Mercutio seems to recognize. Remember that Mercutio, the name means Mercury, that he is the guide of pilgrims and the protector of pilgrims. So his whole job is to protect, if you will, Romeo. And remember that Tybalt, as we said in an earlier episode, Tybalt is probably taken from this Byleth demon character, the king of cats or the prince of cats. So to not respond when you are met with somebody who's acting as though he were a demonic force, to not respond is to be vile, to be submissive, to be effeminate, and really to put yourself and your friends in great danger. That's why Mercutio then jumps into the fray and decides he's going to fight Tybalt. And he's doing okay, except that Romeo jumps in to try and stop the fight. And the minute Romeo tries to stop the fight, that's when Mercutio gets skewered, right? And as soon as Romeo puts his hand out to try and stop it, right? He says, "Hold, Tybalt, good Mercutio," and he jumps in there. And under his arm, as is pointed out by Mercutio later on, under his arm, the sword goes into his breast, and he's made into shish kebab by this Prince of Cats. So Romeo's very attempt to try and make peace between these two, his very attempt to put the flower in the muzzle of the gun, is the thing that has caused the death of his friend. It's the thing that's caused the death, if you want to look at it symbolically, of his guide, Mercury. It's the thing that's caused the death, even of, you could say, his conscience. His conscience is in some ways tied up with Mercutio, as apparently is his sense of being a man. And when Mercutio dies, his conscience, his sense of being a man, his focus as a pilgrim are all gone, all lost. It's at that point then that Romeo, having killed Tybalt in this rage, which I find remarkable, because it's almost like he goes from one extreme to the other, right? From being this sort of peacenik type, he goes to being absolutely war-driven. Just flips a switch. Remember in Sonnet 129, it's like it talks about extremes, the extreme ends of things, that lust unbridled has these extreme shifts. Romeo goes from being this peace guy who's like, "Oh, Tybalt, you're my brother," to wanting to rip his head off. And if you've ever seen the version by Zeffirelli done back in the 70s, there's a lot of merit in that version. And one of them is one of the things I think is meritorious is the fight scene between Romeo and Tybalt. Now, it's gotten a lot of flack because Zeffirelli stages it so that the two of them end up having their clothes torn off, and they're fighting just by fists alone and biting each other, trying to gnaw each other's ears off. And there's been a lot of people have commented on this as excessive. Some have said it's homoerotic, you know. I put all that aside for a minute. The way I read that scene in Zeffirelli's movie is that these two human beings are reduced by rage, by lust unbridled. They're reduced to animal level fighting with one another. It's like watching two wild dogs try to destroy each other. Now, it is an awful scene, really. And then at the end, when Tybalt gets skewered, it's amazing to watch. If you haven't watched it, I highly recommend the Zeffirelli movie. But that somewhat plays into what Shakespeare's getting at. I really think Zeffirelli captures that element of what Shakespeare's getting at. Namely that this unchecked lust takes away that thing that makes us human, which is our ability to choose the good. Unchecked lust, it seems, makes us into creatures, into animals that are driven around by forces beyond our control. Call those forces gods, call them biological juices, call them fate or fortune, whatever they are, they drive us like slaves towards an inevitable ruin. It's very different from a providential vision of the world. Providential vision of the world says there's a God who loves all of us and cares for all of us. And what happens to us, no matter how deadly,
is for our own good. It's to improve us. And when we subscribe to a vision of the providential universe and a providential God, we hold to the idea that God loves us, and even the worst things can be overcome because they work towards our good. When we cease to subscribe to that idea, we are left with only one choice for vision of the world. Well, there's two choices. The one choice is that there is no point at all. It's all random stuff. But the other choice is that there are gods or powers, what the Egyptians called natures, right? We get the word nature from that, natures. And that those gods or powers drive us towards ruin. Like Aphrodite driving the Trojans and the Greeks towards ruin in Homer's great work. And notice here, strikingly enough, just after Tybalt has been killed, and Benvolio says, "Fly, because your life is in danger," and Romeo says, "Oh, I am fortune's fool." It's a powerful line, "I am fortune's fool." Bear in mind that when he says, "I am fortune's fool," this has been a vision that's been developing since the beginning of the play. A loss of the vision of his pilgrimage towards Rome. A loss of his vision towards finding meaning in the world. And a movement more and more towards being enslaved, being driven by forces that are beyond his control. "I am fortune's fool" proclaims that he is now no longer in control of his own life. He simply is playing out what fortune has set for him. It is the opposite of the providential worldview, right? The wheel of fortune, the wheel of fate, or Lady Fortune, is a vision that's opposed to providential vision of the world. And when he says, "I am fortune's fool," I am driven like a slave by a power that I do not understand, right? And that's kind of, if you could want to say, that's kind of what Mercutio was trying to protect him from. And one last thing to think on here is that very opening of the scene is sometimes a throwaway scene, right? It seems as though Benvolio and Mercutio are just making fun at the beginning. But really, what Mercutio is pointing out here at the beginning, if we look at Mercutio as Mercury, as Hermes, he's also Hermes Trismegistos, which is Hermes, the thrice blessed god who reveals things to us, who reveals wisdom to us. Hermes, Mercury, Mercutio, reveals to Benvolio, through a somewhat comical tirade, that Benvolio, like every other human, is capable of great violence. That line at the beginning, who says, "Nay, and there were two such, we should have none shortly, for one would kill the other," right? "Thou wilt quarrel with a man that hath a hair more or a hair less in his beard than thou hast. Thou wilt quarrel with a man for cracking nuts, having no other reason but because thou hast hazel eyes. Thy head is as full of quarrels as an egg is full of meat," right? In other words, Benvolio, you think you're above all this. You think you're some high intellectual who doesn't have any of this problem of violence in your life. Or you think somehow that you're too good for violence. But Mercutio is noticing that Benvolio, like every other human, has the potential for great violence, great horror, great terror. And to not acknowledge that fact, that every human is a little war inside, that every person is a conflicting of dark and light, so to speak, is to not acknowledge something fundamental about human nature. We are a fallen race, you could say. And as a fallen race, we need to seek the light, we need to seek the good, we need to be pilgrims towards the good, because if we don't try to find out what that source of happiness and joy, the Logos, really is, if we abandon it, what we end up being is like two dogs inside us that are fighting with one another. And then we make war on anybody for no reason whatsoever. And he says, "You're the kind of guy that would draw his sword on the bartender. right? After a drink or two. You come in and put your pistol on the bar and say, I hope I don't have to use that, gee whiz. And then you take a drink or two and all of a sudden you're trying to shoot the bartender? That's the kind of guy you are, Benvolio. Own it. Live it. Realize that you have just as much potential for being a dragon, for being a monster, as every other human. And you could extend this to some degree, although I don't think Shakespeare says this explicitly. You are just as in need of salvation as every other person. And if you abandon that, what are you left with but Juliet only? Right? All you're left with is that material promise that seems a dream before, right? As Sonnet 129 puts it. That's some powerful stuff. And it's right after that, if you will, sermon. It's like a little sermon that Mercutio gives about human nature. It's right after that sermon that Tybalt enters, right? The Prince of Cats, the demon Byleth character. And Mercutio confronts him directly, right? I don't care that he's coming at all, right? I don't care. Do you think he's going to hurt me? Mercutio says. And he confronts him directly. But the thing that makes Mercutio angry is this word. Tybalt says, Mercutio, thou consortest with Romeo. Why would that make him angry, I wonder? I think it's because consort in this case is a code word for homosexual activity. I think he's suggesting that Mercutio and Romeo are far too close. Mercutio's response seems to indicate that, right? What does that make us, minstrels, right? And they make minstrels of us, look to hear nothing but discord. Okay? My relationship with Romeo is not that, and how dare you suggest that? Is that all you ever think about? And that's when he starts to gear up to fight Tybalt. But he doesn't actually launch into fighting Tybalt until Romeo backs down in an effeminate way from the direct challenge to his person. Because Romeo has abandoned the pilgrimage to Rome. He has been sidetracked by Juliet. And now his only focus is Juliet. All of his hopes are in Juliet. And consequently, he puts all of his friends at risk. He puts his family at risk. He puts his very salvation at risk. And that's pretty lethal stuff. That's why I don't see this as a romance, right? I see this as a tragedy. It's a terrible tragedy. It's as though one were seeing a young person that you teach in high school or in middle school making decisions that are going to end up with their own demise, end up with them in jail. And it's a lethal, deadly thing. Well, thank you all for joining me today. Again, this rewrite or reread of the act, I think, was a good idea, because if you do check out that earlier video, a lot of technical difficulties. Makes for some good yucks. So do check it out. I'll keep it up for a while so you can take a look at it. I highly recommend that you check out the Shakespeare 2020 project, Ian Desher's thing, if you haven't already. It's a galloping read where they're reading one play a week, and if you can't read it, then watch it on the streaming somewhere. I also recommend Kevin Stroud's podcast of the history of the English language. It's an excellent podcast. And I recommend too, if you get a chance, go to my Patreon page and become my patron. And thank you for inviting me to your daughter's wedding on the event of your daughter's wedding. And if you get that reference, you get extra points. So take care, everybody. Thanks for joining me. Take care. God bless. Stay safe. Stay healthy. Go in peace.